Good morning. I'm recording this up in our radio station, and it's a bright sunny day, so therefore it's quite bright in the radio station. And today I would like to talk about the book of Esther. I'm not going to make this into a sermon series, and I'm not going into every little detail of this magnificent book. I'm going to have the so-called bird view of the book, the main plots, but some details I will go into. I know that many of you are rather familiar to this book, the Book of Esther, but perhaps there are things that we together have not really been focusing on, so perhaps we can find out that together today. First of all, we really don't know who wrote this book. The unknown author of the Book of Esther was most likely a Jew, familiar with the royal Persian court. The detailed descriptions of court life and traditions, as well with all the events that occurred in this book, point to an eyewitness author. Because his perspective was pro-Jewish, scholars believe that he was a Jew writing for the survivors that had returned to Judah. Some scholars are suggesting that Mordecai himself was the author, though the approval for him found in this text suggests that perhaps it was another person. Perhaps a younger colleague, we don't know. The book is named for the star of the story, a young Jewish girl named Hadassah, who was taken from her guardian, Mordecai, and forced to compete for the affection of the king. This unlikely contestant for a beauty pageant was then crowned Queen of Persia and renamed Esther, which means star. So then, where are we? Well, we are in Persia, today's Iran. The event of this Book of Esther occurred from 483 BC to 473 BC, during the first half of the reign of King Xerxes, who chose Esther as his queen. Vashti, who used to be a queen, had opposed to the king. She did not stand up for the king, and she wanted to have more freedom, and absolutely she didn't want to compete in any beauty pageant. This was unaccepted, and the king had to write letters to all the important men in his kingdom to apologize, and after that he had Vashti executed. Some feminists today are having her as the first role model of feminist, and it's quite interesting, absolutely, but that is not our focus today. During this time period, the Jews who had returned to Judah were struggling to re-establish temple worship according to the law of Moses. But Esther and Mordecai, along with many other Jews, had chosen not to make the trek back to Judah. They seemed content to stay in Susa, and that was the capital city of Persia, in which the story is set. The book was written no earlier than 470 BC, and probably no later than 424 BC, during the reign of Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes. King Xerxes of Persia was the world's most powerful monarch who ruled the Persian Empire around 486 BC. He is perhaps best known for Jews and Christians from this book, the Book of Esther, but for historians he is perhaps best known for the many wars against Greece. Xerxes followed in his father's footsteps, King Darius. Darius never succeeded to invade Greece, but Xerxes did so. He took over some big cities, but he also had very heavy losses. After losing a battle of Plataea and the city Thessaly, the Persian invasion of Greece ended. In addition to the complete failure to win Greece, Xerxes is famous for building Persepolis. Founded by Darius about 515 BC, the city was the focus of new building projects for the length of the Persian Empire, and it was still expanding when Alexander the Great set upon it in 330 BC. Xerxes was a very powerful king, even if he failed to invade and win over Greece. And losing to the Greek, that is something many historians can't really understand. Since the Persian Empire was so big and powerful, and the two Greek nations, Sparta and Athens, they were always fighting each other, they were far smaller and weaker. Xerxes is also named the King of Kings, and with this knowledge, it is also a far bigger achievement by Esther that we will look into later. Xerxes was killed in his bed at Persepolis in August 465 BC. The Greek historians agreed that the murderer was a man named Artabanus. He was bribing the eunuchs. Artabanus entered the chamber one night and stabbed Xerxes to death. After killing Xerxes, Artabanus went to Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, and told him that his brother Darius was the murderer. Artaxerxes headed straight to his brother's bedchamber and killed him. The plot was eventually discovered. Artaxerxes was acknowledged as king and successor to Xerxes, and Artabanus and his sons were arrested and killed. Well, back to the book of Esther then. As scripture reveals, Esther is a Jewish woman living in Persia and cared for by her cousin Mordecai. She was taken to the king of Persian Empire to become a part of his harem, but because there was something special about Esther, he made her queen. Mordecai, however, didn't tell the king about a major detail, and that was Esther's Jewish heritage. I can imagine that Esther was a very beautiful woman and with a great personality as well. She charmed King Xerxes so much that after deposing his prior queen, he could have chosen any woman he wanted, but he chose Esther. Of course, there is a scoundrel in this story as well. Haman is a hostile and selfish advisor to the king. Haman, he hated Mordecai for refusing to bow down to him, so he plotted to destroy the Jewish people. Haman told the king that there is a certain people that is scattered abroad and despised among the peoples in all the province of his kingdom, whose customs are different from all other people. They will not obey the king's laws, and it's not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. The king gave him authority to handle the fate of the Jewish people, and in return, Haman announced a government-issued decree of genocide. What then could the queen do for her people? The king had not requested her presence for a month. Did his affection for her wane? Was she powerless? Of all the Jews, only Esther had access to the king. Mordecai persuaded Esther to speak to the king on behalf of the Jewish people, reminding her of the unique place in history and silence is not an option. In one of the most poetic biblical passages, Mordecai speaks of God's timing. In Esther 4:14 it reads, "Who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" In other words, Mordecai let Esther know that even her outer beauty was for a reason and would not go to waste. This drama moves like a novel and plays almost like a chess game with some great life lessons. Many of the stories in the Old Testament would have been great Hollywood films, some has, and even then this book of Esther. But sad today, it is not the prior of Hollywood. Then if we look at the different leadership styles, well, God is God. He is the leader in control. He took Queen Vashti off the throne. He gave Esther the throne. He used Mordecai, and he puts everyone in place. God loved, and he still loves, the Jewish people. And he didn't create Esther's beauty and finesse for her and her alone. Esther was placed in a royal position to assist in the delivery of God's divine plan. When it comes to leadership in this story, yes, Of course, God is the one, but Mordecai is the true leader as well. He refuses the smallest compromise. We read that in 3:2-6. It reads like this: And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down and pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, Why do you transgress the king's command? And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's word would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Well, Esther, she is a great leader as well. Esther stepped up. It's a great timing, when to lead, what to do, and where to go. We read in Esther 4:16-17, which reads, Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Esther knew, of course, that going to the king uninvited could be her death sentence. Anyone who came into the king's presence without being summoned could be executed. So what does she then do? Before making a life or death decision, she calls for the Jewish people to join her for a 3-day fast. You see, fasting and praying is so unbelievable important. But Esther, she was clear that in this particular situation, a heavenly response was needed for an earthly situation. Esther needed direction. When we need God's grace, fasting and prayer open up the gate for spiritual growth. It removes distractions and it places us on a path of humility. We all, including myself, must be much better on this. Following the fast, she put on her best royal robes, approached the king, and told him of Haman's plot against the people. The Jewish people were saved. Haman was hanged on the same gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai, and Esther received Haman's estate. As believers, there are no such things as accidents or coincidence. God's timing is providential. Esther's divine moment of providence came by accepting her responsibility to go to the king. However, Mordecai was clear when he said to Esther that she could be the one who saved the people or not. God will use you only if you are ready, or he will find someone else. Sometimes we must stand up in courage, even if it's not popular to do so, and to risk it all. Esther's obedience saved God's people from genocide. The reality is that Esther didn't know what would happen when she approached the king. She acted in obedience, and by doing so, she saved a nation and received the best. If we summon up Esther's leadership, Esther is the leader under control. Her position does not steal her compassion. She knew her place. She felt the need to fast and pray, and she was willing to take this huge risk. And she also understood the importance of timing. Well, on the other hand, Esther conceals her Jewish identity, and she engaged in a pagan beauty contest and she gives her virginity away to a pagan king not being married. Then we have poor Haman. Haman is the leader out of control. He listened to the wrong people. He thought highly of himself. He set himself up for the fall. He was greedy, and he reaped what he sowed. The enemy was planning to wipe out the Jewish population like many times before, and sad to say, not for so many years ago. Anti-Semitism is getting stronger in the Western world today. We see that in France, in Germany, England, and even in Sweden. Jesus clearly warns us in John 10:10, which reads, "The thieves only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I came so that they could have life, yes, and have it full to overflowing." The enemy has a plan for your life, and that is to stop you from achieving God's intended plan for your life. When the Christian church was born, the enemy had double trouble, Christians and Jews. Esther had a relationship with the Jewish people that was not public, yet, since she was Jewish, she would be destroyed if the decree was carried out. This is true of the church. We have been grafted in and cannot disclaim our relationship with the Jewish people. Today, aggressive Islam and atheistic communism threaten the state of Israel. These are the same two major world forces which threaten the church. In John 15:13, it reads, "Greater love than this no man hath, than a man who lay down his life for his friends." That verse certainly comes to mind whenever we think of Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was arrested in Poland in February of 1941 and in May sent to the Auschwitz death camp. As prisoner 16670, he eventually laid down his life for another prisoner on August 14, 1941, at the young age of 47. Beda Chang, a Jesuit priest in China, he was arrested because he refused to renounce his faith and to cooperate with the government in their persecution of the church. Chang was arrested, imprisoned, tortured, then died of his wounds in 1951. During the 19th century in Korea, more than 10,000 martyrs died in persecutions which extended for over more than 100 years. That's very scary. And in 1930 Spain, they had a military coup. Many people suffered. The church took an undeserved blame for being part of this new fascist regime, and it ended up in a so-called Red Massacre. Martyr of the Spanish Civil War, it's the name given by the Catholic Church to all the people who were killed by the opposition to Franco. The so-called rebels during the Spanish Civil War, because of their faith, the rebels thought of Christians as collaborators to Franco. More than 6,800 religious leaders were killed. Whole church buildings were put on fire, and people, old, young, and children, were burned to death. Jacques Hamel. He died when his throat was slit by two Muslim men who both pledged allegiance with the Islamic State. The attack occurred while Hamel was holding a service in his parish in Saint-Étienne on July 26, 2016. During the attack, Hamel said, "Satan, go away," when confronted by his killers. Recently, Christians in Syria, Afghanistan, Egypt, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Ethiopia, etc., has been killed in Islamic attacks and persecutions just for the cause of being followers of Christ. It is terrible. But Jesus himself said, "Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And in Matthew 10:22, Jesus says, you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. The Bible tells us that as Christians, we have a hope as children of God. We have an inheritance to look forward to, and we have eternity of peace and joy awaiting us. When life gets tough, we see in the Bible that this life is not forever. It's fading. It is but a wisp of smoke in the wind compared to eternity. We have so much more to look forward to. We have a true hope in that. Jesus is our blessed hope. Without his coming to earth, without his willingness to lay down his life for us, without his resurrection, without his ascension, without his promise to return, we would have no hope. What was once a hopeless situation can be changed to a hope-filled situation when God works through his people. God brought hope and deliverance to Esther, Mordecai, and all the Jewish people living under King Xerxes' reign. He did it then, and he can do it again. No part of our lives is untouched. God is controlled of every aspect, whether we want him to be or not. And there is nothing that is not subject to him. And the best thing we can do for our lives is to search for and surrender to his will. Amen.